Welcome to the Profile Corner. In today's video, I'll be building a step stool using some black walnut that I've got here in the shop. I found a plan on the internet. This is by John Heinz on the iBuildit site. He created a detailed plan. I'm going to make some modifications to the plan so that it works a little bit better with the material that I've got here. I've got some wide black walnut that I was able to mill to 15/16 of an inch thick. And I'll be using this for the two steps that are in the stool. I'll be changing the bevel angle that the legs sit at from 3 degrees, which he's got in his plans, to 5 degrees. And I'll be cutting several of the joints using the PantoRouter, while he used a router table and other methods to cut the joints in his detailed plan and his video. I'll also be making the stool a little bit taller than what he specified here, and I'm hoping that that's going to help me out because I recently installed a Delta air filter in the shop. I'm hoping that the step stool is going to allow me to reach up to where the air filter is at and swap it out as needed so I don't have to get out the 8-foot step ladder. Okay, so what we're going to do first is head over to the radial arm saw and we'll rough cut the legs to length, and then we'll go over to the table saw, rip them to width, and then we'll go over to the PantoRouter and we'll make some test cuts there, because in John's plan he has these steps with sliding dovetails in them, and the legs have the matching dovetail profile on the top of them. And I thought that that would be a really good way to lock this together, and so I'll be doing the same type of joint using the PantoRouter. Okay, so let's head over to the radial arm saw now, and we'll rough cut the stock that I've got here, which is 3/4 of an inch thick. I've already surfaced this on 3 sides, and then I've run it through the wide drum sander to rough sand off all the planer marks. So we should be ready to go with this. I'm not sure how much of the stock that I'll need for the legs. I've got a bit of it here, and unfortunately this longest board has several defects in it that I'll have to cut around, but I can work with that, I believe. I don't think that I'll need to use this long board for much. I should be able to get most of the material out of this board, and this started out as a board that was 10 feet 8 inches long, and because of the warp in it, I had to cut it into several pieces so that when I ran this over the jointer, it didn't end up being too thin once I got it flat. There was quite a curvature in this board from one end to the other end. And the same with this board. It started out being roughly 6 feet long, and I had to cut it in half so that I could maximize the thickness of the board so that it ended up at 15/16 of an inch thick. Okay, so let's head over to the radial arm saw to do some rough cuts of the legs to length. The legs will get glued up after we put the dovetails on the ends of the boards. And I've made some adjustments to the camera since the last video. I'm hoping that these adjustments help to keep the entire video frame in focus rather than just tracking where my hand is at. And so what I need to do first here is just kind of square up the end of this board. The end of the board is actually going to be cut at 5 degrees, so I just want to square it up for right now. In John's plan, this is the front leg, and he's got it at 5 3/4 inches long. I actually want to make mine 7 inches long, which will make the front step a little over roughly 7.5 inches tall, or thereabout. maybe a little bit shorter than that, considering the 5-degree angle that the legs will be at. So I'm going to cut this board at a rough length of 8 inches, and then I'll cut a mating board later on that's the same length. So I just did a skin cut. Okay, so now, for this next board, it looks like I can get both of the back legs out of this one board. Just square up the one end here. I've got to have the pointed edge against the fence. And it looks like I've got a little bit of a knot here on that. I want to get rid of that. So now, in John's plan, he had the back legs at 11 3/4 inches, and I'm going to make mine 14.5 inches long. So it gives me a little bit taller step. So I'll rough cut this to about 15.5 inches. You just make sure that I've got 31 inches of clear space. It looks like I do have just that. So I'll cut this to 15.5. Okay, and that leaves just one more board to get out of this long board here. And so what I need to do is look at it and see where I've got some good wood. Unfortunately, there's a lot of defects in this board. It looks like if we cut it right here on this side of the knot, then we've got some clear stock back in here. Check right here to see if I've got 8 inches. I don't quite have 8 there. The center of the board is right here, so I don't want to include the tip. So let's go right here and cut it. Cut it with the wrong edge against the fence, so I'll recut that. So that the pointed edge is against the fence. And it looks like the knot was at an angle here, so I do need to recut it anyway. knot is out of there. So now I need this board to be 8 inches long. Okay, so now we'll head over to the table saw and cut these boards to width. Okay, I'm going to take the offcut that had the number of knots in the center of the tree, the pith in it, and it was clean on the other side. I'm going to take this offcut and I'm going to cut it down so that it simulates one of the steps so that we can cut our dovetail into this with our dovetail bit. And then we'll be able to create matching profiles on the legs later on. Okay, I'm going to first rip this board down to 8 5/8 wide, and then I'll flip it over and rip it down to 8 1/2 inches so I get rid of the edge here that I cleaned up at the joiner, because it does have some minor little marks in it left by the jointer. This will be the board that simulates one of the steps. I'll be cutting the dovetail into this so that it'll just be a test dovetail for us later on. Okay, now we need to cut down all of the legs for the step stool, and we need to make the front legs, according to John's plan here, they need to be 6 1/4 inches wide, and the back legs need to be 6 1/2 inches wide. So what I'll do first is I'll clean up the edge that's not jointed, and then I'll cut these boards to the right width. So I'm just going to make a quick measurement here to see how wide these boards are. And it looks like they're right around 8 1/2 inches, or a little bit wider than that. So I'll set the fence to 8 1/2 inches. And then we'll make a first cut on each of these boards. Okay, so now we'll set up to cut these to width. The back legs need to be cut to 6.5 inches. Legs get cut to 6.25. Now we need to cut the 5-degree bevel on the ends and cut these boards to the right length. Yeah, I've decided to cut the 5-degree bevels at the table saw rather than over at the miter saw. I've installed my 40-tooth combination blade onto the saw, and unfortunately when I've got this blade tilted, I don't have a zero clearance insert that allows me to use the blade guard. So I have to be extra careful with where I place my fingers while I'm using this blade tilted at 5 degrees. I'll have to eventually rectify that so that I can use the blade guard when I tilt the blade. Okay, so it's at 5 degrees now, or 85 degrees, as it showed on the angle finder that I've got here. So I'll put the angle finder aside. Now what I can do is to use my crosscut table here. Let's see where we're at there. Okay, I'm thinking that that's going to cut it off. So I'll set my stop block to hold it in place for an accurate crosscut. And I'll go ahead and I'll make that first cut and verify that it goes all the way through, and it leaves me a nice 5-degree bevel here. Okay, that looks like that works. That I've got this set up correctly so that I get the bevel on the right side. This is a right tilt saw, which means that the blade tilts toward the rectangle. This is a right tilt saw. I need to make sure that the shorter side is up on these boards when I cut them. Okay, so I'm going to bring it down. Let's go down to 7 1/8. So I can set a fence here to 7 inches, and that should be perfect. While we're at it here, let's just cut the other board to 7 inches. I'll take it down to 7 inches. Now wait for that blade to come to a stop before removing that board, because I'm working without a blade guard on there. Okay, so those should be at 7 inches long. And now for the back legs, I need to make those 14.5. So I'll start out by cutting these on just one end. Okay, I've got it set to about 15.25. So that the short side is up. Cut this 14.5. So I have to cut them a little bit long. And then we cut them to the right length. Okay, so let's see what their length is right now. Okay, they're 1/16 over. If you've got a left tilt saw blade, you may have to work a little bit differently than what I'm doing here in terms of how much over you cut. It appears as though I can set this to exactly the length that I need, and it comes out correctly for me. If you don't have a big cross-cut table like what I've got here, you can also use a miter gauge. This one is a pretty good one. It's a Incra Miter 3000 SE. So this would also work. If you don't have one of these, you could use a standard miter gauge that came with your table saw. You may want to add in a wooden fence onto it to extend the length of the miter gauge, and then you'd also be able to clamp potentially a stop block onto the end wherever it needed to be to give you the correct length. This ink miter gauge has a flip down stop, somewhat similar to the flip down stop that's on my crosscut table. Now that we've got these cut, we need to head over to the PantoRouter, and then we'll cut a test dovetail across this board. And once again, this board will be used to simulate one of the steps. And then we'll have to create dovetail joints in the ends of these boards, just one end, so that it fits into the dovetail that's cut into this board. Okay, I have the sample board that'll be taking the place of one of the steps set up here in the vertical clamping jig on the PantoRouter. I have a 14-degree, half-inch wide D14-55 white side dovetail bit mounted into the PantoRouter here. I have the slot mortising template up here on the template holder, and then I've set the template holder height using a 1-inch setup block, and then on top of that a 3/4 inch setup block. And what that'll do is that'll give me down here essentially a 1/2 inch of a reveal when this dovetail is cut. So in other words, it'll be up as if it were centered in a board that's 1 3/4 inches tall. And so that should leave a 1/2 inch down here once the sideboard is attached. Okay, and I've got a stop set down here on this other end so that I don't come through all the way on the other end, because that's what I'll be doing with the actual steps as well. I'll be stopping the sliding dovetail before it gets all the way to the front of the board. I've cut down a dust collection boot so that hopefully it won't add too much resistance when I'm using this short dovetail bit that I've got mounted in here. So hopefully that'll work out for us. I need to set the depth of cut to 3/8 of an inch. So I'll get out a 3/8 inch setup block. I'll bring the router bit forward until it makes contact with the board. And now I'll use a 3/8 inch setup block to set the depth of cut. Okay, that's set. Now we're ready to make our cut. We need to start out here at the end of the slot mortise template. I need to set the table on the PantoRouter to 5 degrees. So I've got my digital angle finder here. And unfortunately this has not got anything for the magnet in the base to hold on to, because this is an aluminum top. I've got the fence set so that when the whitest boards are put up onto the table, they'll be centered on the table. I have a sample board up here, and as you can see I've got the 5-degree bevel set up so that when the router bit is butted up against the board, it's flush all the way around. And then I've set the height so that if I were to bring this out and then bring it in 3/8 of an inch, which will be the depth of cut we'll be cutting, it looks like the high points here are going to leave behind exactly the same amount of material on the top and the bottom. As you can possibly see right there. Okay, so the depth of cut's been set to 3/8 of an inch. I had the backstop set so that when I put one of my other boards up on top here, I can get that board in exactly the same position, extending out from the table. I won't be using the bearing going down through the middle. I'll have it going across the top, And I don't recall exactly where I have to have this. In a previous video, which I'll show on the screen here briefly. So now what I should be able to do is just run this across the top, swing down, and then run along the bottom. And that should hopefully give me a sliding dovetail in the end of this miter joint. Now wait for that to come to a stop, and then we'll try a test. As you can see there, so it is going together, a very tight joint. May not even need glue for that. And in that video, I had this bearing exactly centered on the template to get the joint to come together. So what I'll do is I'll actually start out with it a little bit closer to the template holder than center, and then I can do a quick test. Okay, so I'll be running along the top, and then I'll come all the way across, and then run across the bottom to cut the other side of this sliding dovetail. Okay, let's see if we can test that. Okay, that looks like that was a lucky guess. I don't know if I can get this to go all the way on, but it looks like I've got a lucky guess there in terms of the height that was necessary to achieve a very tight joint. So I'll use that setting then. Let me just verify here. It looks as though I didn't cut it all the way through on the bottom. Okay, let's do another quick check just to verify. And now it's a little bit too sloppy. Okay, so what that means is that I'm going to have to position this bearing a little bit further to the back. Okay, and now since I put a bevel on both ends of this board at 5 degrees, I should be able to just spin this around and do another quick test. Okay, we'll test it again. That looks like that's fitting together nicely now. Let's see, which end do we want to put the Dovetail on. I've got that upside down. And now it matches up. Okay, so I think that this will work out. Obviously this step board here, our test board that we're using for our step board, is the wrong size. It's too long and it's a little bit too tall. But this will give us an idea of what the step stool will look like when it's assembled. So the next thing we need to do is to go back into the plans and take a look. In the plans, it calls for a slot to be cut essentially in the center of both the front and the back of these boards, and that slot needs to be cut 3/4 of an inch wide, and it looks like 1 3/8 inches deep from the spot here. And also it has to have a 20-degree bevel on it, which is going to complicate things a little bit for us, except that we've got the PantoRouter here and we can tilt the table to achieve that 20-degree angle. And so I think if we clamp the boards onto the table so that the PantoRouter can come in from this direction, that'll work out for us with the table tilted to 20 degrees. Okay, now I need to set the PantoRouter table to 20 degrees. I have a 3/4 inch wide straight router bit mounted into the router. This came with a PantoRouter, and what I've done is I've used a swing stop here so that it sets the board to a known position. Move the swing stop out of the way so that when I put the next board up on here, I can just swing the swing stop back into position, and that next board will be back at exactly the same projection from the table. So I've used a vertical template holder here. I've used the vertical template holder here, and unfortunately this is limiting how far up I'm able to reach with the router bit, but it should be sufficient so that I can make the cut all the way through. I have a dust brush on here so that I can use the dust collection. Alright, let's go ahead and we'll get started with the cut. The fence is set to exactly 1/2 of the width of this board, and the template here was also centered with a template holder. The depth of cut is set to 1 3/4 inches. And now I need to make sure that I get the second board put up here in the same orientation so that the bevel on the board is facing up. Now I need to move the fence because the shorter legs are not quite as wide. Shorter legs are only 6 1/4 inches wide, so that means I need to set the fence at 3 1/8. From the center line of the table. Okay. I've got to move the swing stop because the board is narrower. So that means I need to double check the length of cut. Okay, so now the next thing that we need to do is to glue these boards together. And what I think I'll do is I'll put in 2 biscuits to help with the alignment so that I don't have to do so much sanding after the glue up finishes curing. Yeah, I have the boards on the workbench here so that the outside face is up. I can verify that by looking at how these dovetails are tipped. And obviously the legs are going to be splayed outward. So I've got the biscuit joints marked here where they're going to go. I've got my biscuit joiner, so now we're ready to get started. And move down slightly, let's recut that. I don't normally use this left-handed. I'm doing it so I'm not blocking the camera. And so it's making it a little bit difficult to keep the unit from sliding ever so slightly. Okay, so now we should be able to put our biscuits in. Okay, that joint goes together, that's good. And I'm using undersized biscuits. I've got the biscuit joiner set for number 20, and I'm using, it looks like number 10 biscuits here. I suppose I didn't need to do that, but I did it anyway. Okay, so these go together. So now I'll get these glued up. Glue has had almost an hour and a half to set up, so I'll just scrape off any of the excess glue and remove these boards from the clamps. Okay, so now that we've got these boards set up and out of the clamps, what we need to do is to create the top step. And according to the plans here, the top step is supposed to be 14 inches long. I think what I'd like to do is make mine 15 inches for the top step. And of course, because these legs are splayed out, the bottom step will actually have to be a little bit wider than that. We'll figure out how wide it needs to be once I get the top step cut, with the sliding dovetail cut into it. Now this board needs to be cut to 7 1/4 inches wide. So what I want to do is I want to take off this one edge, and then I'll come back and take off some on this other edge, so that get rid of a little bit of defective wood right there. So let's take a look at that. I'll go to 9 7/8. And I'll take it down to 7 1/4. I have the top step mounted into the vertical clamping jig on the PantoRouter. I've got the 1/2 inch diameter 14-degree dovetail bit mounted into the PantoRouter, and I've set the slot mortising template up here on the template holder. I've set a stop in the back here so that the router bit will stop cutting a 1/2 inch before it gets to the front on this board, and so that'll hopefully allow us to create a stopped dovetail. I've got the template holder height set to 1 3/4 inches using 1 inch and a 3/4 inch setup block. Okay, let's go ahead and we'll cut the sliding dovetail. Just make sure that we can actually get out to the spot. Okay, I've got to be really careful out here on the end. Okay, so there's the first cut. Now I need to flip the board over and change the position of the stop. Okay, so there's our 2 sliding dovetails cut. Now let's try to assemble the legs onto the top step. Okay, I've taken my digital bevel gauge, set it to 85 degrees, and now I can put this down onto the workbench. And I've already got that leg set to 85 degrees. And then I should be able to do the same over here. Okay, now I should be able to just take a measurement going across. And I'm getting 15.5. And to that, I need to add in however much this is overlapping here, which is a 1/2 inch. On each side. So what this is telling me is I need to cut the board to 16.5 inches long so that it'll be the right length for this lower step. I have the top step cut to 7 inches wide by 16.5 inches long. I've set it up here on the vertical clamping jig, and I've moved the stop so that the router bit will get within a 1/2 inch of the front edge here. So now we're ready to cut. Let's go ahead and put the bottom step on. And get the top step back into the right position here. Okay, so that looks like that's going together real well. Now what we need to do is to cut the braces that go down into here, from here over to here, and also up in here all the way through. And as a reminder, we cut this at a 20-degree bevel, and because of that, and these legs are splayed out at 5 degrees, the net angle here is actually 15 degrees for the board that'll go across. Okay, I did a quick measurement here of the size of the stretchers that I'm going to need. And I got, for the lower stretcher, 15 3/4 inches long. And I may need to make it a little bit longer than that initially and then cut it back. And then for the top stretcher, it needs to be 14 3/8 inches long, and again I'll make that a little bit long and then cut it down afterwards. And it needs to be 1 17/32 inches tall so that it comes up to this point right here, so as not to interfere with the sliding dovetail. Okay, this video is close to an hour long after editing all the clips up to this point. So I think what we'll do is we'll finish up this project in the next video, which will be coming out in a couple days. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. Bye.